Greetings, I'm Samuel Gladden, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, Education, and Human Development here at the University of New Orleans. Thank you for joining us for our series, COLAEHD in Conversation. In this series, I interview our faculty who are world-renowned for their work in research and creative activity. If you'd like to know more about them or about us, write to me at sgladden@uno.edu. And now, enjoy COLAEHD in Conversation. Greetings and welcome to COLAEHD in Conversation. I'm Samuel Gladden, Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, Education, and Human Development here at the University of New Orleans. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Michelle Thompson. Dr. Thompson is an associate professor in the Department of Planning and Urban Studies. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Always good to see you. Tell us a bit about your background and what brought you to UNO.
In 2005, I was a graduate student at Cornell University. I knew nothing about New Orleans or the university. But by 2007, we had a project with about 5 other universities to try to come down and do some mapping for the Environmental Protection Agency, because they really needed to know what were the issues on the ground, what was the damage, and what was the assessment.
Right.
So that was my first engagement, and then I realized, no different than any other project that I've been involved with, there was a big data gap. And so I started about 2 years later coming down actually as a consultant to try to help the city with developing data that can be provided to the community. But they weren't really ready at that time. And I was then asked to do a workshop for the library on how to help community organizations collect data and map it. So that's how I got to UNO. And then after, I really felt like this was a calling. I used to call myself the missionary of technology because I just love the idea of being able to collect information that can be given to a community. But New Orleans obviously was in a particularly difficult space without technology,
Absolutely.
without data. And I wanted to make sure that what the university could do, and at that time I had been invited to become an assistant professor, could really work well with the city, but also engage the community. So that's how I came down here in 2008.
That's an amazing story. So post-Katrina, just post-Katrina,
Yes.
what a place you saw when you got here.
Yeah.
It's incredible. What are your primary areas of interest in teaching and research?
Well, they both kind of connect very much so, as I really have always had a passion for trying to democratize data. And it really is a cliche, but the idea of being able to know that there's information that can be gathered by a community from their perspective that needs to be translated into information that can be used by the city. Just in terms of recovery, that was one of the biggest projects that we had in New Orleans, was how do we get information about the lower 9th Ward, its condition, where properties were, where they weren't. And that information wasn't available from the city, even a map, because all of the systems have been broken.
Oh my goodness.
So a lot of the work was, how do we create the information with our student volunteers and then work with the community so that after we stop the project, we could then be able to make sure that they can update that information, give it to the city, and ultimately all of that information would go back to the federal government in order to bring funds. So that is the connection between all of my work, which is public participation, geographic information systems, or PPGIS. And my first few years here, I really focused on applied PPGIS. And it was more work about the damage assessments, light. But fortunately, that's shifted to be more about economic reinvestment. And that's what I try to teach students now, is how to engage the community and look at what's possible instead of what's not there.
And that's democratizing data, using data for that purpose.
Yes.
That's really interesting. What are you working on now?
Oh, I have 2 exciting projects. One of them really follows up on what has been done in terms of housing. Housing is a big issue everywhere, and particularly for the unhoused. So about 4 years ago, I started a project primarily with the support of the Louisiana Manufactured Housing Association funding, to be able to see if manufactured housing, tiny homes, or accessory dwelling units could be provided in the city. There was no zoning available. If there were housing, it was not necessarily legal. So we started looking at the zoning and what's possible. In the interim, the state decided, yeah, we think that we can do something around tiny houses, but not manufacturing. In the city, they started looking at accessory dwelling units, but there wasn't zoning available. So what was needed by many of the housing organizations is what kind of sites are available, where was the zoning, what's possible, and what's a tiny house? Because there's affordable tiny homes, and then there's also market rate that can be a couple $100,000. And my focus in my work has always been community engagement and affordability.
How do students become involved in that work with you?
One of the projects that I started in 2009, I got the name of this from a former colleague, was Who Data. Or as I would say, you say who data down south, right? But up north, where I'm from, it's who data. And what that meant was, how do we, again, bring together the best of information so we can help the community? Students would join my Geographic Information Systems, or GIS classes. And in the first half of the class, I teach them how to use the technology. What's good data? What's bad data? And then I would have a client that I would select and kind of pre-screen and ask them what kind of data is needed. So Hoffman Triangle was one that we worked on for about 4 years. And what the students were able to do is go down to the neighborhood, take photographs of the parcels. There was junk strewn around, there's empty lots, a lot of blight. Put all that information together and then met with the housing folks who said, we've got about 100 houses that need to be moved from the hospital site. And they need to be distributed throughout the city. Where do we put them? Well, the federal government had money to help move those houses and give soft second mortgages so that first-time home buyers who formerly didn't have a bank account or had very bad credit got into a housing program, got a loan, and then we were able to move the houses, get them rehabbed, and you were able to see redevelopment happening. So that project was not obviously a semester, but that's what's great is these projects are over time. And I think what we now know is that the university is now known for providing those resources. And one of the projects that I'm going to be going to a meeting tonight is on affordability. And there's a new housing organization who reached out and said, saw your Hoffman Triangle project and we'd like to start another one. So I think that's how students can get involved.
And that's the direct effect of classroom learning in the world,
Yes.
making a difference in the world. That's wonderful.
And that is, especially for planning and our planning students, that's been really important because it's very different when you're sitting in front of a classroom and you're having even a capstone that just says, this is how you present information. And now here we are in a situation where we're post-Katrina and living with COVID. How do we communicate with the community? Somebody gets sick, you have to shut down a whole community meeting. We have to be able to use technology. So some of the things I've been changing in my classrooms are, how do we use the best of our technology to communicate ideas, to learn how to listen to community, and still give back information that they can use.
What classes do you usually teach?
I teach a variety of classes because while I primarily like to work on applied research, I've done policy analysis, economic development, neighborhood development, but the courses that I think I find the most interest in and really takes me back to community engagement are the gentrification courses in urban environments, and that connects to my research. And I didn't talk about that, but I'll kind of bring that back.
Sure.
And the other class is New Orleans region. And what's nice about that class is students from the whole campus have taken it. I've got engineers and psychologists and a lot of folks who have lived there their whole life, but they didn't know why one street is the English side and one's the French side, but it's the same street. Well, the fascinating thing is I didn't know either. So when I first had to teach the course, I had to take about 50 books and learn about New Orleans history. And the difficulty that New Orleans had to face when it came through different periods of slavery. But what everyone says is about New Orleans, it's unique. And what's unique is there was that period of slavery, but there's also a lot of free people. There's a lot of engagement in terms of food and culture and music that blends together, and that's very different than in other areas.
We really are a living laboratory in New Orleans, aren't we?
Yes.
And that's one of the opportunities that students have when they come here is to live and learn in that laboratory.
Yes.
Tell us what it's like for a student who comes to the Department of Planning and Urban Studies for the first time. What can the student expect in general about the kinds of classes one might take, the kinds of experiences one might have, and especially what can students expect about finding faculty who want to engage them in their research?
Okay, so in terms of the students, as you know, we have undergrad, graduate, and the PhD in urban studies. So for the undergraduate, what I believe is understanding what planning can do. And I remember being a public affairs student, and I always wonder, what's planning? It's almost everything. But there's certain aspects about planning that students can get involved in and will hopefully get them to the passion that they will have, and truly when they say lifelong learners. So if someone's interested in environmental justice, we have a student class right now, it's a combined class of undergrad and graduate students. And after they understand the background of environmental justice, we're now at the point in the semester where they can pick a topic, whether it's food injustice or looking at Cancer Alley and the funding that's coming from the Biden administration to help. Transportation, we've got the Port of New Orleans, food and culture. There's so many different ways that students can really learn about. There's many different ways that the students can learn how to impact community. And one of them that, matter of fact, I just sent out on our listserv today, is that the city planning department is putting in an application for pro-housing, which is affordable housing. This would give students the opportunity to go to City Hall, participate in learning about what this application can do and have impact. So that directly connects to their classes, and they're helping to really help reshape the city.
That's amazing. One thing I really admire about you, Dr. Thompson, is the connection that you have with students. Not just students who are here, but students who have been here who have gone on to go to professional work in the field. Tell us a couple of stories about what we might call star students who have gone on to do great things.
Okay, well, thank you. I have 3, but I know there's many more. So for those who I haven't selected, my apologies. So the first one that comes to mind really is Jenny Garcia. And I met Jenny when she was in her first year as a Master's of Urban and Regional Planning graduate student. But what's interesting about Jenny is that she was a 3rd and 4th grade teacher, and she was from Baton Rouge.
Oh, wow.
And she just saw that the children that were in the school didn't have the kind of resources that she saw in other communities. So it really struck her that she needed to understand the why different policies decisions were made. How can more resources come into a community? And that really drove her into, I want to make a change, but I need to get the tools. We connected in the Geographic Information Systems or the mapping course. And it was great because she asked different questions than other students. Like,
Sure.
Why is it that we're going to the Black Pearl and we're looking at this school, but we're only mapping around the school? The school is more than just that anchor in the neighborhood. What's happening outside? Where are the play places? So I think that part of her curiosity made me think broader and made our mapping projects even better. After she got done with her MERP, she got a job.
Yeah, that's the Master's in Urban and Regional Planning.
Yes, thank
For
you.
those who don't know the degrees in the program, right.
She was able to get a job as the Director of Historic Preservation in, and one of the nice things is that we have certificate programs.
Right.
At the time, we didn't have them, but talking about the different ways that students can learn, she happened to come in, was interested in education, but then she found historic preservation in the desire to want to make sure that we can capture the history. After that experience, she then went, because she'd had the mapping background, she's now working for the federal government in Baton Rouge for cultural and historic preservation.
That's wonderful.
But then it doesn't stop there. She has been one of my star student volunteers, alumni of Who Data.
Okay.
And she's worked on many projects. She's even been able to come in when I've had other students who want to learn how to do the community engagement, because it takes a lot of time to do kind of these startup mapping projects, all as a volunteer and alumni. And I think that's another piece that the students that I'm about to talk to, and there's 2 others, they are willing to come back. They're willing to engage. And I'm sure other students are in other departments, but that's what I find. Then Jenny decided last year that she wanted to go further. And she's now in her 2nd year in the PhD in Urban Studies. And she and I are working on a project that we just started last year that she introduced me to the Gullah Geechee community in South Carolina. So it turns out that a Master's in Urban and Regional Planning student is working as a planner for Hilton Head. And she sent in a job advertisement that I put on the listserv. And I said, I think this would be really interesting to learn about that community. There's a connection here between New Orleans, Gullah Geechee, African diaspora. And so we now are working on a project to really look at the Gullah Geechee culture, mapping, and how to help preserve some of the fastly eroding historic art, culture, and music. The second student I want to talk about is Brittany Arsenault. Brittany Arsenault is a native New Orleanian, or New Orleans, from New Orleans. And Brittany came out of a family where she was almost a first generation coming to the university. And she worked as a bartender and also as a waitress. And during her 2nd year, she was basically funding her own education. Then again, took the GIS class. And she was so fascinated by the data, and we had a lot of folks coming in from outside of the community, especially during football games and different events, that wanted to volunteer to collect still recovery data. So we started creating what people would now consider a Who Data playbook. How do you engage? Where's the data? Where are the forums? And then we were able to really come out to the community and have folks do a day-long service of collecting data that would help in the recovery. So Brittany was really the person who helped me put the playbook together. And the work that she did in the Treme was really phenomenal, because there are a lot of stories about Treme, right? There's music and there's movies, but the people that live there who have rented for a long time, as we know, they can't afford it anymore. Where do people go? What kind of opportunities are there? So she was trying to get not only the story of what the plight of people is, but also try to find other places that they could move to, and we did a map around that. And so that was a really big project. And the last project that I think was really important that Brittany helped motivate was that the Neighborhood Development Foundation has spent 30 years teaching people how to really be better stewards of their money. Again, I mentioned the folks who have no bank account, maybe they only work in a cash-based industry, they have no or low credit. And so the federal government said, how do we know that these programs that we're giving you money for to teach people how to improve their credit are working? So with her help, we collected 30 years of people who came into the program, evaluated who got through the program, who improved their credit, got banking, and then out of the people, and there were thousands, we were able to track 3,000 of those folks who got first-time homes, and just from that one organization and 3,000 people, there was over $20 million of investment just in mortgages.
That's incredible.
So those stories to me goes back to what you had said about what do students learn. You can really, if you dream it, you can go research it.
Absolutely,
right?
Yes.
You can get the data, you can create it, you can engage with the community, make a project that really will make a difference, write on it, present it at a national organization, and truly, as a result of that work, Brittany is the only person who is a senior planner for the city of Los Angeles with an undergraduate degree from UNO.
How wonderful. Wow.
All the other planners there have master's degree from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, and I'm proud to say that the education that she got here at UNO and the experience, and obviously who she is as a person and her, her dogged determination, is a really exemplary example of what we can do with our students.
Absolutely.
And they can do for themselves.
Yes, and where they can go.
Yes. And the third person, so Brian Baldwin is from upstate New York. He actually went to Syracuse University, where I went as an undergrad, so we had an immediate connection. Brian was the very first student, he was a graduate student getting his master's in urban and regional planning. And he helped me start the very first project in the city with Who Data. And at the time, it was really difficult because in 2007, 2008, there were plenty of places with lights out. There were plenty of people just trying to get back home. And so it wasn't a time where we could really have the community engage and collect data. So Brian was really steadfast in really being able to get out and collect data. We work in the lower Ninth Ward, New Orleans East, Lakeview, or any place that would want us to come in, we would try to get data and maps together so that would help with the recovery process. So Brian is now working for the gold standard or platinum standard of GIS, Environmental Systems Research Institute. And he has a wonderful job, and he's called a senior engineer. And again, the idea that he was able to get the education experience, which led him into something he has a passion for, which is to try to help students tell their story. The story map is kind of an automated mapping, and Brian teaches other communities and universities how to use it, and he's helped us as well, and I use that in my classroom.
3 incredible stories. Thank you for sharing your story with us. I'm so grateful to you, Dr. Thompson. If our viewers want to get in touch with you, how can they reach you?
Well, I think the easiest thing is Google. But, so there are a bunch of Michelle Thompsons out there. But I would say Michelle Thompson, Who Data, PPGIS.
Okay.
And also, one of the projects that I'm really excited about that I hadn't mentioned is what I'm really focused on in the next few years, a 15-minute city. And that's the project that I recently went to Paris and I'm working on now with Carlos Moreno in the city of Paris, and now the Goutte d'Or, which is the Golden Drop neighborhood. And we now have a formalized project that we're going to be able to bring Paris and the world to NOLA. This just happened a week ago.
That's incredible.
And so the work, it takes a long time, right?
Yes, it does.
It's taken 2 years. But the idea that if you look up UNO and you think about neighborhoods and you think about mapping, and if you can remember GIS, I think they'd be able to find me.
That's wonderful. Again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure visiting with you today.
Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us for today's edition of COLAEHD in Conversation. For more information about today's guest, please see the links below. I'm Dean Samuel Gladden, and I hope to see you again for another edition of COLAEHD in Conversation.